the 2008 crash, the global food crisis, the collapse of textile industries supplying Western consumers. These events bring into sharp focus the complex, interconnected, and seemingly borderless nature of problems within our global economy. Against this backdrop, countries, sectors, and individuals have become increasingly exposed to decisions beyond their control. And these same qualities characterize contemporary environmental problems, such as land degradation, climate change, and water stress. Here, consumption decisions and production stresses can ripple across global supply chains, with few actors incubated to the impacts. Tackling contemporary environmental problems means connecting their analysis with a deeper understanding of consumer and producer influence within the global economy. However, linking consumption decisions to environmental impacts is incredibly challenging. Supply chains are complex, globalized, and difficult to trace. My PhD attempts to overcome this problem by combining macroeconomic and environmental data of countries and sectors within the global economy. By using macroeconomic data on consumption, production, and trade, we can evaluate the structure of global supply chains and the influence of different actors within them. My analysis captures 250 million supply chains, which connect 15,000 sectors, 189 countries, and 7 billion consumers. And I use environmental accounts, which capture resource use and pollution associated with production activity across this system. And by combining these data sets, I'm able to attribute the environmental burden of production activities across the world to countries, sectors, and consumers in remote locations. Let's take the distribution of output for the agricultural sector. We might find only a proportion goes to final consumers as fruit and vegetables, but the remainder is purchased by other sectors. So output could enter the livestock sector, the food and drinks market. It could end up as furniture or be used to make t-shirts. And by mapping these flows, it allows me to assign responsibility for agricultural production and its associated environmental impacts to sectors, countries, and consumers where final consumption occurs. So what do these production and consumption relationships look like at a macro scale? Here's a visual depiction of global trade representing water dependencies between different countries. Water use driven by international trade has increased eightfold in the last 15 years. And the UK is an interesting case study within this context. Here's the UK's global water footprint over the last 25 years. And over this period, the territorial water footprint of the UK economy has remained relatively constant. However, as you'll see, its non-territorial impact has increased dramatically, such that 95% of the UK's water footprint occurs outside of its borders. And I can see exactly where this is imposed geographically and over time to assess the water-related risks of UK consumption, both domestically and from the vantage point of exporting nations. A notable feature of the UK is that its reliance on water, energy, and land is located in countries where these resources are scarce, insecure, and degraded. And this raises further concern about the stability and sustainability of the UK economy. Now, this is just a glimpse of the capability of my model and insights from my research. The flexibility of this approach, combining macroeconomic and environmental data, enables environmental footprinting of any country, sector, or consumer quickly and in a manner which enables cross-comparison. And this systematic overview lends itself to the identification of critical actions that individuals, businesses, and governments can take to alleviate environmental problems, both local to them and global. The challenge, though, is how we can communicate this analysis to decision makers in an accessible and actionable way. And last year, I was fortunate enough to receive the CSAR Award in recognition of the policy relevance of this research. And I'm using the award to develop an impact appraisal and decision support tool to enable different decision makers to evaluate the impacts of their consumption or procurement choices against various environmental targets or sustainability goals. And the hope is that with this information, individuals, businesses, and governments can begin to make consumption decisions with both eyes open to the risks that they face and the impacts they drive in relation to our global environment. Thank you.
Well, if you wanted an example of the serious application of research to things that really matter, I think we've just heard it. We'll take a couple of questions, if you don't mind, Oliver.
Yeah.
catch my eye, if you will. Gentleman at the front here.
I was trying to get a picture of what it might look like for me if I was an individual trying to make a decision. Do I buy this product or that? Can you, if I was, I don't know, deciding am I better to buy this television with this energy rating or that one that's been flown in from somewhere else based on climate input, could you help with that sort of decision?
There's a slight difference in terms of scalability. So what you're describing is the life cycle analysis of certain products. And what I'm doing is kind of macro scale, but I can downscale to the consumer level. So I can look at per capita environmental impacts of different countries and where they're distributed around the world. And it has been used, this type of research, in the WWF carbon footprint calculator. So if you've ever gone in and assessed your carbon footprint, this is the kind of back end. It's looking at all the supply chains that you're reliant on. So that kind of impact appraisal can be done, but it's at a more coarse scale. That's helpful, thanks.
So I'm going to ask the last question, which is cheating, I know, but I've got the microphone. What can a policymaker do? So I'm in Whitehall and got a bowler hat and all that stuff. And I see your work and I think, gosh, that's rather naughty of us. We seem to be making mess everywhere else so that we can enjoy ourselves here and look as if we're the good guys. What could I do as a civil servant in policy terms using your findings? How are they using it in practice, I think is what I'm trying to say clumsily.
I think it comes down to the framing. So I previously worked with DEFRA looking at the impacts of UK consumption abroad in relation to biodiversity, looking at palm oil supply chains and also soybean consumption. And the government don't want to hear that the impact that their domestic consumption is having a large global impact. They're more interested in their exposure to risks through supply chains. So the information that I showed you before, looking at the UK's water and energy security, I mean, post-Brexit, this is a serious issue. And instead of asking the government to adopt a consumption-based accounting approach where it takes into account the UK's impact globally, it might be a greater kind of hook to talk about their exposure to risk. And I think that's quite pertinent now with discourse around food security in the UK.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, I hope you'll stay with us for the evening, Oliver. I'm sure you'll be mobbed if you come to the bar afterwards in the nicest possible way. That was absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
Thanks.